The hallway outside the training gym was supposed to be quiet at that hour. Most recruits from Bravo Company were either in the mess hall or collapsing in their bunks after another brutal conditioning block. But that calm, thin, temporary, almost respectful, vanished the moment the three recruits stepped into the corridor and spotted her. She hadn't meant to draw attention. She rarely did. Her steps were quiet, her posture was controlled, her eyes held that neutral calm that made people underestimate her even more. And tonight, she was just crossing the hallway after a late set of recovery drills, her hair still damp from the showers, her uniform jacket half-zipped. No one watching would have guessed anything extraordinary about her. But the three recruits had already been whispering for days. Rumors, ego, insecurity wrapped in bravado. The kind of tension that grows when you put young, competitive trainees inside a structure built on pressure. They'd been looking for a moment, any moment, to test whatever story they thought they'd heard about her. And tonight, they saw her alone. The tallest one, Briggs, nudged the others with a grin that said everything. Let's see what she does when she can't hide behind instructors. The second, Mallory, cracked his knuckles like someone preparing for a sparring match. The third, Kane, kept glancing around nervously but followed anyway, because that's what people do when they think a group gives them courage. She noticed them before they said a word. The shift in air, the echo of too many footsteps too close behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her instincts were tuned sharper than any alarm on base. She stopped walking only when their shadows merged with hers. Briggs stepped in front of her, blocking her path with a smirk that tried too hard. "Well, well," he said, pretending to keep his voice casual. "Look who's wandering around alone. You training for that special program you bragged about?" She didn't respond. She simply watched his posture, scanning for tension in his shoulders, elbows, hips, tiny giveaways recruits never realized they broadcast. Mallory moved behind her. Kane hovered near the wall, swallowing hard. She finally spoke, her voice calm, almost quiet. "Move." Briggs raised both eyebrows. "That how you talk to your classmates? Come on, we just want to know what makes you so special, all that mystery, all that discipline. You act like you're better than everyone." She didn't sigh, didn't roll her eyes. She just repeated, "Move." Briggs leaned in, lowering his voice. "Or what?" For the first time she looked him in the eyes, steady, unbothered, and cold in a way he couldn't understand. That look alone made something uncomfortable twist in his gut, but pride made him ignore it. Mallory stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "Relax, Briggs. She's not going to do anything. Look at her. She's tiny. I bet she's all talk." Kane flinched at the words, instinctively sensing something wrong, but too late to back out. She took a slow breath. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the three around her. She was thinking about the instructors who had warned them during orientation. Do not provoke anyone. You never know who's walking next to you. But recruits, cocky young men driven by adrenaline and inexperience, rarely listen to wisdom delivered calmly. Briggs smirked once more. "Say something now. What are you going to do? Report us? Run back to Navy SEAL Channel fanboys and brag?" She almost smiled at that. Almost. But instead, she said one sentence, slow, steady, deliberate. "Remember who I am." The three exchanged confused glances. None of them understood the warning. None of them even recognized it as one. Briggs stepped forward like he was about to shove her. He didn't get the chance. She moved faster than his brain could process. A step forward, a shift of weight, her hand snapping upward with surgical precision. Her palm cut his wrist mid-movement, twisted it just enough to drop him to one knee, not enough to break, but enough to shock the arrogance out of his eyes. Mallory blinked, stunned for a fraction of a second, then charged. She pivoted lightly, sent his momentum crashing into the wall with a shoulder redirect he never even saw coming. His breath exploded from his chest with a grunt, and his hand slapped the concrete trying to steady himself. Kane froze. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a bully. He had been pulled into this by pressure and pride, and now he saw the mistake with painful clarity. But fear made him move anyway. He lunged in desperation, arms out, hoping that maybe numbers meant something. They didn't. She slipped under his grab, one hand pressing against his forearm, the other guiding his elbow. With a smooth redirection, she sent him stumbling past her. He crashed into Briggs, who was trying to get off the floor. They both went down again in an embarrassing tangle of limbs. Not a punch, not a kick, not a strike meant to injure. Every move she made was clean, controlled, and terrifyingly efficient, like someone who had practiced these exact reactions 10,000 times, because she had. Mallory staggered back from the wall gasping. What the hell was that? Briggs tried to push himself up again, shaking in disbelief. You think you're tough? You think that makes you—" She stepped forward, not threatening, not dramatic, just present, purposeful, controlled. She said, 45 seconds, looking at all three. That's how long it took for you to realize the mistake you made. Kane swallowed. He looked at her stance, her balance, the way she stood like someone who measured distance without thinking. Who are you?" he whispered. She looked at him, not unkindly, but with that cold honesty forged by real training, not the beginner drills they were barely surviving. "You won't believe me, but you'll remember." Briggs opened his mouth to argue again, but the instructor's whistle echoed from the far end of the hallway. Footsteps approached, sharper, heavier, authoritative. The three recruits panicked. The last thing they needed was to be found surrounding someone like her. They scrambled to their feet, standing awkwardly at attention, trying to look like nothing happened. It didn't work. Their breathing was off, their shirts were wrinkled, their faces held panic they couldn't hide. The instructor stepped into view, arms crossed, eyes scanning each of them. "Why are you three here? You're supposed to be in barracks." He stammered, We were just, The instructor's gaze shifted to her. A slight nod, almost invisible, a silent acknowledgement between people who recognize each other's training long before anyone says a word. She returned the nod, barely. The instructor turned back to the recruits. "Whatever you think you were doing," he said, voice sharp with warning, "do yourselves a favor. Don't try it again." The three nodded quickly. She walked past them without another glance, calm as she had been when it all started. No triumph, no gloating, no fear. Just that same controlled presence that unsettled them now more than ever. As she reached the end of the corridor, Briggs whispered to the others, voice shaking, What is she?" Kane whispered back, "I don't know, but I'm done messing with her." Mallory rubbed his sore shoulder. "She can't be just a recruit. That wasn't normal." They all watched her disappear around the corner, realizing, finally, that silence wasn't just confidence, it was experience. And the truth they had failed to see until it was too late was now unavoidable. They had cornered someone who had survived things they couldn't imagine. Someone trained differently. Someone who had already earned a title they didn't even know they were standing next to. But they would remember, because she had told them to. And now they understood. The base settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, boots thudding across concrete, muffled voices drifting from the barracks, the metallic groan of doors opening and closing as recruits dragged themselves from one obligation to the next. But for the three recruits who'd confronted her, the night felt different. Their steps were lighter, their words quieter, their confidence shaken. Briggs, Mallory, and Kane walked in silence as they headed back toward their bunks, each replaying the last 45 seconds in their minds. No matter how they tried to rationalize it, luck, surprise, adrenaline, they couldn't deny the truth they'd seen in the way she moved. She hadn't reacted like a scared recruit. She had reacted like someone who'd been trained to keep people alive, including herself. Someone who understood violence, not as chaos, but as geometry. Kane finally broke the silence. "Guys, she didn't even hit us." Briggs shot him a glare, but the truth of it gnawed him as well. "Doesn't mean anything," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "She just caught us off guard." Mallory rubbed his shoulder where he'd slammed into the wall. "Caught us off guard? Man, I didn't even see her move. One second I'm reaching for her, the next I'm kissing concrete." They walked a few more steps before Briggs exhaled sharply. He hated losing, hated being made to look like a fool, and more than anything, he hated not understanding what had happened. "It doesn't add up," he said. "We've been training for weeks. We're not helpless." "That wasn't training," Kane replied quietly. "That was something else." Mallory slowed his pace. "You think she's, like, prior service or something?" Briggs shook his head. "No way. If she was, they would have told us, right?" "They wouldn't. Not necessarily. But none of them knew that." Back in her own barracks wing, she sat alone on the edge of her bunk, towel draped around her neck, hair still damp from earlier. Her hands were clean, steady, not even slightly shaken. She'd been through worse, much worse, and she'd handled tonight the same way she handled everything on base, with restraint. Restraint was what separated real operators from people who liked the idea of being operators. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the folded sheet of paper she kept hidden there. A name written in bold letters sat at the top, her reason for joining the program, for staying here as a recruit, for keeping her real identity buried. The Navy didn't usually insert seasoned operatives into training pipelines, but this assignment wasn't usual. She wasn't here to learn. She was here to watch, to monitor, to find someone. Footsteps echoed outside the barracks. She tucked the paper away just as the door cracked open and the instructor from earlier stepped inside. He closed it behind him, waiting until the room was empty enough to speak without waking anyone. "You handled that well," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "They're kids. Kids with too much ego, and no idea who they were dealing with." She finally met his eyes. "No one can know I'm here, not yet." He nodded. "They won't talk, I made sure of that." But her eyes narrowed. She knew better than to rely on assurances. You can't guarantee what fear does once adrenaline fades. The instructor smirked faintly. "Maybe not, but I can make sure they're too tired tomorrow to remember their own names, let alone brag about tonight." She almost smiled, but didn't. She never let herself relax too much here, not until her mission was over. The instructor's expression shifted, softening. "Any progress locating him?" "Not yet," she whispered, "but I'm close." He nodded once more before stepping back toward the door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "It always is." When the door clicked shut behind him, she leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. She hated lying to their recruits who honestly wanted to succeed here, but the Navy had sent her with strict orders, and she was following them to the letter. Find the missing man, track the signals, stay unnoticed, and under no circumstances reveal what she really was. Meanwhile, the three recruits lay in their bunks, restless. Briggs stared at the ceiling, replaying her words. "Remember who I am." His jaw tightened with irritation. "What does that even mean?" he whispered to himself. Mallory was still asleep, tossing and turning in the dark. "Maybe she's like a martial artist, or grew up fighting or something." Kane exhaled slowly. He'd been replaying her movements, trying to understand them. "No," he said, "that wasn't just fighting. That was trained, professional. Like she knew exactly what we were going to do before we did it." Briggs scoffed. "You're overthinking it." But the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Kane sat up slightly. You ever see someone move like that? Even in drills? Even instructors aren't that fast. The silence that followed said everything. Briggs finally sat up too, swinging his legs over the side of his bunk. All right, he muttered. Fine. Let's say she's got some kind of advanced training. Why the hell would someone like that be here, acting like a recruit? Mallory shrugged. Maybe she washed out of something else? Kane shook his head immediately. No way. That wasn't someone who failed. Briggs clenched his fists. Then what is she? Kane stared down at his hands. Someone we should have left alone. The tension in the room settled deep in their bones. But morning brought a different kind of pressure. Before sunrise, alarms blared across the barracks, ripping everyone from sleep. The recruits scrambled out of their bunks, throwing on their uniforms in record time. The drill instructors barked orders as they stormed through the aisles, pushing trainees out toward the training yard. Briggs, Mallory, and Kane exchanged panicked glances. If the instructors were running the morning, that meant today wasn't going to be normal. And they were right. The recruits lined up on the damp grass as the sky slowly turned pale orange. Everything was silent except the rhythmic stomp of boots and the occasional cough from someone who hadn't slept enough. She stood near the back of her squad, blending perfectly into the formation. The head instructor stepped forward with a clipboard. Today, Bravo Company begins its first advanced assessment block. For the next 72 hours, you will be tested on endurance, strategy, teamwork, discipline, and focus. You will fail if you rely on ego. You will fail if you ignore instructions. And most importantly, you will fail if you underestimate anyone around you. His eyes flicked briefly toward her. None of the recruits noticed, but she did. Briggs felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Mallory swallowed hard. Kane glanced nervously toward where she stood, but she didn't look back. She stood with perfect stillness, breathing slow, eyes forward, ready. The instructor blew the whistle. The first test began. The recruits took off running, but she didn't run like a recruit. She ran like someone who had done this course hundreds of times, like someone who had been here before, like someone who was prepared for something much larger than a training exercise. And Briggs, Mallory, and Kane, whether they liked it or not, were about to discover exactly who they had cornered, and why she told them to remember. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Branches skimmed their shoulders, roots nodded beneath their boots, and the cold morning air bit into their lungs as the team of 4 sprinted into the assessment zone. The instructors had launched all teams at staggered intervals, but as soon as they crossed the marked line into the woods, every recruit felt the same electric current of pressure. This wasn't a run. This wasn't a drill. This was a test designed to break people. Reyes moved ahead naturally, not forcing herself forward, not competing, simply flowing. Her strides were smooth, controlled, efficient. Every line of her body spoke the same silent truth the 3 recruits had tried to ignore. She wasn't guessing her way through this course. She already knew it. Kane stumbled over a fallen branch, struggling to keep pace. Mallory's breathing had already grown ragged, and Briggs, big, competitive, and stubborn, pushed the hardest, but even he could feel it. She was holding back. They reached the first checkpoint, a narrow clearing marked by a faded wooden sign and 2 orange flags jammed into the earth. Beyond the flags lay a steep incline coated in mud and loose soil. Other teams, farther down the line, were already scrambling, slipping, and crashing their way up the slope. Briggs squinted at the path. "We go up." Reyes didn't move. "No." Mallory blinked. "What do you mean, no? That's the route." "That's the route they expect you to take," she said calmly. "It's the slowest." Briggs felt irritation rising in his chest. "Then what do you suggest?" She pointed to the thick brush off to the right, dense, ugly, and absolutely not a designated path. "We go through there." Kane's eyes widened. "That's not even a trail." She said, "It's faster." "You can't know that," Briggs snapped, but she looked directly at him. "I can." There was no arrogance in her voice, just certainty, the kind that comes from experience, not guesswork. Briggs hesitated, torn between pride and the memory of her hand twisting his wrist like it weighed nothing. Mallory wiped sweat from his forehead. He said maybe we should trust her. Briggs exhaled sharply, almost annoyed at himself for agreeing. "Fine, but if we get lost, that's on you." Reyes didn't respond. She simply slipped into the brush, disappearing so smoothly it startled all three of them. They followed, awkwardly, loudly, clumsily. Branches slapped their faces, thorns snagged their sleeves, mud sucked at their boots. But despite the chaos, the path leveled out sooner than expected. Within minutes, they circled around the incline and emerged on the ridge above it, passing the other teams who were still gasping their way up the main slope. Briggs stopped dead in his tracks, panting. "No way!" Reyes kept moving. "Stay close." Kane shook his head in disbelief. She was right. Mallory let out a low whistle. "We're actually ahead now." But no one had time to celebrate. The second phase of the assessment loomed ahead. A long, winding ravine with jagged rock walls and unstable ledges. The ground sloped downward into a trench barely wide enough for two people to move side by side. At the far end, the instructors had set up the first challenge station, a set of heavy crates, ropes, and pulleys waiting to be assembled into something none of them had been briefed on. Rhea slowed her pace just slightly, letting her team gather around her as they approached the ravine entrance. Briggs studied the rocky descent. "We go down." She said, "No." Briggs threw up his hands. "Again? Are you allergic to obvious instructions?" She nodded toward the upper ridge. "Look at the ledge." Mallory squinted. "I don't see anything." Kane stepped forward, scanning the angle. "Wait, she's right. There's a narrow shelf running along the wall. If we take that, we can bypass the scramble and drop down closer to the station." Briggs' jaw clenched. "How the hell do you see that?" Reyes didn't answer. Instead, she crouched at the edge of the ravine, fingers brushing the dirt lightly, not testing it, but feeling it. She shifted her weight, angled her boots carefully, and stepped onto the narrow shelf as if she were stepping on a sidewalk. Briggs's eyes widened. "That's 1 inch wide." She corrected. 4. Plenty. Plenty? For who? Mountain goats? But Reyes was already halfway across, balancing perfectly despite the loose dirt sliding around her boots. She didn't wobble, didn't flinch, didn't even look down. She moved like she had done this 100 times, like she had done far worse 1,000. Kane gulped and started after her, moving cautiously but determined. Mallory hugged the rock wall like it was a life raft in a storm. Briggs hesitated. Pride battled fear inside him, but pride, as always, was louder. "Fine," he muttered, stepping onto the ledge. "If she can do it, I can do it." He took 2 confident steps, then immediately slipped. His foot skidded off the ledge and he lurched forward, arms pinwheeling. His boot scraped uselessly against the stone until a hand shot backward and caught his uniform collar. Her. She didn't turn around. She didn't struggle. She simply held him steady with one hand, her stance unfazed. "Careful," she said quietly. I had it." "You didn't." He said nothing. He couldn't. She guided him back onto stable footing before continuing along the ledge. All 3 recruits followed her in silence now. Shame, awe, and fear mixing together until none of them could tell which emotion was which. Minutes later, they dropped down onto a flat area near the challenge station, with a controlled slide down a dirt slope. Other teams were still climbing. They were first. The crates at the station were marked with symbols, the ropes knotted, the pulley wheels scattered in the grass. A small laminated card lay on a barrel with instructions. Establish a functional hoist to retrieve the beacon hanging from the tall pole 30 meters ahead. Kane picked up the card. This looks complicated. Mallory stared at the ropes hopelessly. I barely passed basic knots. How do they expect us to? Reyes interrupted softly. Give me the rope. Briggs crossed his arms. You know how to build this thing? She gave him a look that said the question answered itself. She knelt in the grass, moving the pieces with calm precision. Her fingers were fast, but not frantic, looping ropes, testing tension, sliding pulleys into place. Kane watched, mesmerized. Mallory tried to keep up, but gave up after 10 seconds. Briggs knelt beside her, not to compete, not to challenge, but to learn. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice lower than before. "I'm building a 3-to-1 mechanical advantage system," she said without pausing. "It reduces the load so we can lift the beacon without burning out." Briggs frowned. "How do you know all this?" She tied the final knot and stood. "Because I've done it before." It wasn't bragging, it wasn't even a statement of pride. It was truth. They set up the hoist with her guidance. With the system built, Kane pulled the primary rope. The pulley system lifted the beacon smoothly, almost effortlessly. In minutes, they had the beacon in hand. They were the first team to complete the station. Breathing hard but exhilarated, Mallory grinned. "Are we actually going to win this thing?" Briggs didn't answer. He was staring at Reyes again, really staring this time, not with hostility, not even doubt, with recognition. A realization forming at the edge of his mind, too absurd to accept, but too clear to deny. Kane noticed it too. "Reyes," he said cautiously, "who taught you all this?" She slung the rope over her shoulder, eyes scanning the tree line like she was listening for something they couldn't hear. "People you'll never meet," she said quietly. Mallory felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "But why are you here? If you already know all this, why go through training again?" Reyes didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze toward a distant ridge, eyes narrowing just slightly. Briggs followed her line of sight, but saw nothing. She finally spoke. "It's complicated." Kane nodded. "We can handle complicated." "No," she said, voice soft but final. "You can't." Before anyone could push further, a loud burst of static crackled from the loudspeakers hidden in the trees, followed by the instructor's voice. "Teams, proceed to Phase 3. Prepare for resistance." Mallory swallowed hard. Resistance? What resistance? Briggs felt his stomach drop. "Oh no." Kane whispered. "This is the part where they send SimOps staff after us, isn't it?" Reyes adjusted her gear, face completely unreadable. "They're already here." "How do you know?" Briggs asked. She looked at him with the calmness of someone who had lived a lifetime in danger. "Because they're not the only ones moving." Briggs's heart stopped. "Meaning what?" Reyes took the Maya and Master Sergeant Hale rushed across the training field as medics swarmed around Briggs. The Marines around him weren't shouting about dehydration or heat exhaustion. Their voices carried something sharper: fear. Hale dropped to one knee beside the unconscious Marine. "What happened?" Private Jacobs, one of Briggs' friends, shook his head frantically. He was fine, sir. He was doing pull-ups and then just collapsed." Maya's gaze swept Briggs' body. His skin was pale, breathing shallow, pulse uneven. Not the signs of heat stroke, not this early, not in this weather. Something was wrong, very wrong. Hale looked up at her. "Thoughts?" She didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted Briggs' collar gently and saw something that froze her for a full second. A small puncture mark, barely noticeable, but she recognized it instantly. Hale recognized the shift in her expression. "What do you see?" "Not here." she murmured. "We need to move him first." Hale nodded, barking orders. "Get him to the medical bay! Now!" As the medics carried Briggs away, Maya stayed perfectly still, her eyes scanning the perimeter. People were rushing around, but she focused on the shadows between buildings, the corners of sight, the places where people who knew how to stay hidden would stand. Someone was watching. She felt it. Hale noticed her rigid posture. "Hart, what aren't you telling me?" "Later." "No, now!" She looked toward the barracks, jaw tightening. This was deliberate, clean, fast, professional. Hale stared. "You're saying someone attacked him?" "Yes." "Why?" Maya's silence was answer enough. They both walked toward the medical bay, but midway there, Hale grabbed her arm. Not rough, but firm enough to stop her completely. "Tell me what you know." She slowly turned toward him. "This is connected to why I'm here." "Then explain it." She didn't want to. She had spent weeks burying it, but Hale's eyes weren't accusing, they were concerned. And for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't sure if she could handle this alone. So she finally spoke. 3 months ago, my team was ambushed during a covert op overseas. Someone leaked our mission route. Someone inside our own system. Hale's jaw clenched. An insider. Yes. And whoever it was, they weren't done. They started hunting us down after the ambush, one by one. "And you're the last one left," Hale said, voice low. I nodded. "Command reassigned me to safe posts, places where they could monitor for suspicious activity." She gestured toward the base around them. "Camp Henderson is one of those places." Hale took a breath, the truth settling like a weight. "So, you think the person who leaked your mission followed you here?" "I don't think, I know." Hale looked toward the medical bay, horror dawning. "And Briggs, he wasn't the target." "No. It was a warning." "For me." Hale swore under his breath. "Why Briggs?" "He confronted me in the cafeteria. Someone watching would have seen that. They used him to send a message." Hale stared at her. "We need to lock down the base, alert the CO, the MPs." "No," Maya interrupted firmly. "Why the hell not?" "Because you don't know who the leak is." Hale froze. "You think someone here is involved?" She nodded. "If you start locking things down, the traitor will disappear before we find them." Hale rubbed his forehead. "So what do we do?" Maya looked toward the medical bay, her eyes cold and calculating. "We wait." "For what?" "For them to try again." Hale swallowed hard. "You're bait." "I always was." But before Hale could respond, a Marine sprinted out of the medical bay. "Master Sergeant, sir, Briggs, he's awake." Hale and Maya hurried inside. Briggs lay on a hospital bed, pale, sweating, but conscious. His eyes found Maya instantly. Fear flickered across his face. Not of her, but of something he couldn't describe. "Corporal," Hale said, stepping beside him, "tell us what happened." Briggs swallowed, voice shaky. I was doing pull-ups, and then someone grabbed me." "Grabbed you?" Hale repeated. "Who?" Briggs shook his head. I didn't see him. He was fast, real fast. Like he came out of nowhere." Maya stepped closer. "What did he look like? Anything?" Briggs closed his eyes, trying to recall. Tall, black gloves, and his voice. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Maya. He said something." "What?" she asked. Briggs hesitated, then whispered. "He said she should have stayed buried." Hale stiffened. Maya didn't blink. "And then?" Maya asked. And then I felt a sting, and everything went black. Maya stepped back. It's him. Him? Hale repeated. The leak, the one who set up the ambush. He's here, on this base. Hale's face darkened. We need to find this bastard. You will, Maya said. Why do I feel like you already know how? Because she did. Because the past never really stays buried. And the man who tried to kill her team wasn't just after her identity. He wanted her dead. That's why she'd been reassigned. That's why Command sent her to remote bases, not to protect her, but to use her as a signal. Wherever she went, the traitor followed. And now, he was close. Very close. Later that night, as darkness draped the base, Maya walked alone along the empty training yard. The floodlights cast long shadows. Every noise echoed. Every breeze felt like a threat. She stopped near the obstacle course, the same place Briggs collapsed earlier. And that's when she heard it. Bootsteps. Not loud, deliberate. She didn't turn around. You came, she said quietly. A voice behind her answered, calm, smooth, familiar in the worst way. Of course I did. You're the last one left. Maya slowly turned. And there he was. The man who betrayed her team. The man she thought she'd never see face to face again. A ghost from her darkest mission. He stood under the floodlight, expression unreadable, gloved hands relaxed at his sides. Maya Hart, still impossible to kill. She took a step forward. You tried. I'll try again. A long silence stretched between them, tense, sharp, deadly. Then Maya said what she hadn't said in months. This ends tonight. He smiled. Yes, one way or another. Their standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like years. And somewhere in the shadows behind her, Hale was watching too, ready, waiting, unseen, because Maya wasn't alone anymore. Not this time. And when the first strike came, fast, silent, lethal, she was ready. What happened next? No one on that base would ever forget. Not the fight, not the man who attacked her, not the truth that came out afterwards, and especially not the moment they learned that the quiet woman in plain fatigues had been one of the deadliest Navy SEALs of her generation. A secret they almost learned too late.